Have you ever found yourself in a moment where the future just feels completely dark? Like giving up seems like the only real option. A time when hope just feels, I don't know, naive, really far away. We've all been there, I think. But what if hope isn't just wishful thinking? What if it's something more? Like a powerful, active force, a crucial human strength that actually shapes our outlook, fuels perseverance, and builds resilience.
That's exactly it. What's fascinating here is that modern psychology and neuroscience, too, they reveal hope to be just that, an essential strength. And it's something that can be intentionally cultivated, almost like a muscle you can train.
Right. So today we're doing a deep dive into the resilience of optimism, finding hope even when things feel hopeless. We'll try to unpack what hope truly is, how it actually works in our brains, and maybe explore some practical steps, some real-life stories to show you how to find it, even in those really bleak moments. Okay, so let's start with the basics then. What exactly is hope? Is it just, wishing on a star, or is there something more concrete to it?
Well, from a psychological perspective, it's actually pretty well defined. Hope is seen as the belief that we can find pathways to the goals we want, and crucially, the motivation to actually use those pathways. It breaks down into three key things. Having clear goals in the first place. Then what psychologists call pathways thinking. That's like envisioning multiple ways, multiple strategies to get there. And finally, there's agency thinking. That's the belief in our own capacity to act, to persist even when things get tough. So it's really distinct from just blind optimism. It merges. Well, think of it as willpower meeting way power.
Willpower and way power, I like that.
Yeah. The real insight, I think, is that hope isn't passive. It's not just a wish. It's strategic. It's active. It's like having a blueprint for getting from here to there.
So it's not just a feeling then. It's more like a cognitive process tied directly to taking action. That clears up a lot, actually.
Yeah.
But how do we bridge that gap from having a goal to really believing we can act on it, especially when we're feeling really low?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, right? And that's where its importance for our well-being really comes in. Studies consistently show that higher levels of hope correlate with, better ways of coping with stress, greater achievement, both academically and professionally, even improved physical health, and a significantly lower risk of depression. It even affects our brain chemistry. You get these dopamine surges from the brain's reward system, and that energizes us, tells us to keep going, even when the path forward looks really difficult.
Okay, what's truly compelling for me is how closely hope seems to be linked to resilience. Can you unpack that connection a bit more?
Absolutely. So building on what we've just talked about, optimism, which is sort of the general expectation that good things will happen, that things will probably work out in the end, that's crucial for resilience. People who are generally optimistic tend to see setbacks as temporary. They see them as specific challenges, not like permanent, all-encompassing failures.
Yeah.
You have experts like Martin Seligman, Professor Jane Burns. They really emphasize that optimism is what drives our behavior, even when it feels much easier to just give up. There's a great quote from Emily Yaksh. Everyone faces adversity, but it's how you deal with it that defines the person. And Matt Josky calls optimism the engine that powers resiliency. Importantly, it's not rooted in denying reality, but in this sort of unyielding belief that even the darkest hours can hold some hope.
Like the Shackleton expedition. That seems like a prime example.
Exactly. Think about Ernest Shackleton's Imperial Trans-Antarctic expedition. Their ship gets crushed by ice. They're stranded for, 635 days. But Shackleton's relentless optimism, his absolute conviction they would find a way, inspired the whole crew. He basically transformed seemingly insurmountable challenges into surmountable ones, purely through that unwavering belief. Willpower and way power in action.
That story really does highlight it perfectly. So, okay, we know it's powerful. How do we actually cultivate this in our own lives? Especially when things feel utterly, completely hopeless.
Right, the practical side. Well, a crucial starting point is to understand our own explanatory styles. That's essentially how we tend to interpret the events that happen to us. Psychologist Martin Seligman suggested we often learn these patterns as kids, sort of by imitating the voices around us, parents, teachers. An optimistic voice internalizes hope, It fosters a belief in positive outcomes, but conversely, negative feedback, like maybe a teacher telling a child they're hopeless at reading, that can deeply ingrain self-limiting beliefs that stick with us right into adulthood.
Wow, that's powerful. The idea that these patterns are learned so early. But for us now, as adults, can we actually reprogram those ingrained beliefs? Is it too late?
Oh, absolutely not too late. We definitely can. It starts with consciously reframing situations. This means actively looking at a negative circumstance from a different angle, one that recognizes potential lessons, maybe hidden opportunities, or even just partial successes you might have initially overlooked.
Okay, give me an example.
Sure. So imagine someone, let's call her Kim, loses her job. A hopeless view might just fixate on it as a personal failing, right? I wasn't good enough. But a hopeful reframe might see it as, well, maybe a chance to find a path that actually suits her evolving interests better, or maybe an opportunity to develop some new skills she's been wanting to learn. The insight here is that the control isn't always about what happens to us, but really about how we choose to interpret and respond to it.
I can see how just shifting that perspective could be incredibly powerful.
Yeah. But what about those really big, daunting goals? How do you keep hope alive when the mountain just seems way too high to climb, when the finish line feels impossibly far away?
That brings us to a really crucial point, especially when facing those big goals. The power of small victories. Research on motivation, on self-efficacy, it consistently shows that each small achievement, each little win can spark that dopamine reward in our brains, which in turn feeds our optimism.
Like building momentum.
Exactly. It's kind of like the foot in the door strategy in sales. Once we accomplish one small step, we feel more motivated, more capable of tackling a bigger one. So for instance, if your big goal is rebuilding your finances after getting into debt, don't just stare at the massive total amount. That's overwhelming. Instead, focus on consistently paying off a small portion, or maybe hitting a micro savings target, like, say, putting just $10 aside each week. Each mini success encourages perseverance. It reinforces that belief, okay, I can actually do this. It's the cumulative power of those tiny wins. Okay, that makes a lot of practical sense. Start small. And beyond those mindset shifts, are there simple daily practices we can integrate into our lives to sort of build this hope muscle consistently?
Yes, definitely. There are several really powerful techniques you could literally start using today. First one, clarify your goals and pathways. Don't just have a vague desire like, I want things to be better. Identify a specific, concrete goal. Let's say, I want to switch careers to become an educator. Then brainstorm multiple routes, multiple substeps to get there, maybe volunteering, networking, looking into credentials. Then select just a few feasible actions so you don't get overwhelmed. The key here is specificity. Vague hopes rarely turn into reality.
Right, make it concrete. What else?
Second, you can practice something called mental contrasting and implementation intentions. It sounds complicated, but it's quite practical. You imagine your best possible outcome, really visualize it. Then, you contrast that with the current obstacle standing in your way. And you pair this with specific, if X happens, then I'll do Y plans. This helps you navigate setbacks when they inevitably pop up.
Like pre-planning for problems.
Exactly. For example, if I feel discouraged by my exam results, then I'll remind myself I overcame previous study challenges by getting a tutor's help, and I will email one that same day. This kind of proactive planning transforms potential roadblocks into solvable problems.
I really like how practical that if-then planning is. It gives you a ready response. What's next?
Third, you could try hope journaling. Just dedicate maybe 5 minutes each day. Note down small victories, finishing a chapter of a book, having a good conversation, anything. Reflect on challenges you faced and how you managed them, or maybe what you'll try differently next time. You can also visualize future steps you plan to take. It's really about consciously building a positive mental archive of your own resilience.
Kind of like collecting evidence for yourself that you can cope.
Precisely. Fourth, actively work on reframing negative self-talk. When adversity hits, notice those automatic thoughts like, I just can't do this, or it's all ruined. Challenge them. Replace them with more balanced, hope-oriented language. Something like, okay, I've struggled with things before, but I learned new skills then. This might be tough, yes, but I can start small, I can gather support, and I can see incremental progress. Your internal dialogue is incredibly powerful. It can be your best tool or your biggest saboteur.
Now, that internal critic can be loud sometimes.
It really can. And finally, number 5, surround yourself with hopeful influences. Optimistic attitudes that really are contagious. Actively plan to spend more time with positive people, the ones who focus on solutions, not just problems. This can help you avoid getting stuck in those negative thought loops yourself. Also, maybe engage in activities like, say, gardening. It teaches patience, teaches growth. Recall happy times, resilient times from your past. Actively look for the silver lining in tough situations. Try to use less black and white thinking.
Little things add up.
They do. And simple things like practicing gratitude, maybe keeping a gratitude jar, or creating positive anticipation by planning small pleasures or fun activities ahead of time. The insight here is that hope isn't purely internal. It's deeply influenced by our environment and our daily habits.
Okay, it's one thing to talk about these concepts, these strategies, but it's another thing entirely to see them in action. Let's maybe look at some real personal journeys, people who've faced huge challenges and somehow found their way through.
Yeah, absolutely. And building on that, these stories, I think they powerfully illustrate that mental health challenges, or any major adversity really, they don't have to define us. Overcoming is possible. It often involves embracing vulnerability, actually seeking help when needed, and prioritizing self-care.
Who comes to mind?
Well, think about J.K. Rowling. She battled severe depression, anxiety, near poverty, all before Harry Potter became this global phenomenon. Her relentless pursuit of her creative vision, despite those immense personal struggles, that's a real testament to her agency, her pathway thinking. Or consider Michelle Obama. She was very open about her journey with depression in her book, Becoming. She talked about learning to find balance by making self-care a non-negotiable priority and holding on to that affirmation. The only way through is to keep going. Her story really highlights the power of acknowledging the struggle while actively seeking solutions.
Yeah, I remember reading that.
And someone like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, he's been remarkably open about his own battles with depression. By doing that, he offers this really powerful message of strength and resilience and helps normalize mental health challenges for millions of people who look up to him.
And it's not just the world-famous figures, right?
Yeah.
This kind of resilience, this finding hope, it plays out in everyday struggles, too. That reminds us these principles are universal.
Exactly. So a natural next question is, how do regular people, people like us, tap into that same strength? Take the example of Gina. She lost her father very unexpectedly. Completely overwhelmed by grief, she genuinely doubted she'd ever feel joy again. But through counseling and by setting really small, manageable goals, like just resuming a hobby she'd abandoned long ago, she slowly, gradually rekindled hope, eventually finding new purpose. Her journey just perfectly illustrates the incremental power of those small victories, even when facing profound loss.
Just one small step at a time.
Right. Or think about Raj. He's 45, feeling completely stuck, hopeless in this corporate job he hates. He consciously decides to adopt hope theory, sets a long-term goal, transition to a creative field, and he takes it step by step, taking night classes, testing out freelance gigs on the side. Each small milestone reaffirms his hope. He's systematically building his way power right alongside his willpower.
He's creating the pathways.
He is. And think about community resilience. In a region hit by devastating floods, neighbors didn't just despair, they formed a volunteer network. Despite all the destruction around them, their hopeful approach, immediately brainstorming solutions, envisioning rebuilding it, fueled this collective communal hope. And they built it through daily micro-successes, like repairing a small bridge that reconnected two isolated parts of their community. It shows the power of collaborative hope.
That's incredible. Working together makes a difference.
Immense difference. And then there's that almost unbelievable true story of the rock climber. He falls into an ice crevice, breaks his leg. I mean, a truly hopeless situation, right? Miles from help. He knew he couldn't make it all the way back to camp in one go. It was impossible. So he focused intensely just on reaching the next rock or the next ice opening. That was it. Taking these tiny, agonizingly painful steps, passing out from the pain, then waking up and repeating that single focused affirmation, next rock. He eventually, somehow, made it back to his friend's camp, survived against all odds. It really echoes what Viktor Frankl observed in Man's Search for Meaning in the Nazi concentration camps. He noticed that those prisoners who had something to live for, some sense of purpose, even a tiny glimmer of hope, were far more likely to survive.
What really stands out to me about all these stories, it's that consistent, persistent belief in just taking the next step, no matter how small it seems, how insignificant maybe. It's like that tiny flicker that somehow keeps the flame from going out completely. So, okay, we've talked about personal journeys, personal strategies, but what does this all mean when the world itself feels incredibly uncertain? With huge global challenges like economic instability, climate change, ongoing conflicts. How do we possibly maintain hope then?
Yeah, zooming out, that's a heavy question. It's clear that chronic exposure to these big global stressors can trigger persistent fight or flight responses in us. It just drains our mental resources, leading to what can feel like paralysis by negativity. You see it in worries about financial stability, what people call eco-anxiety, especially among younger generations, that pervasive sense of threat from geopolitical stuff or social polarization. It's a lot to carry.
It really is. It sounds like a recipe for despair. Honestly, how do we prevent that overwhelming feeling from just taking over?
Well, This is where things get really interesting, philosophically almost, because some perspectives suggest that true, robust optimism might actually require first countenancing despair.
Countenancing despair.
Yeah.
Meaning what?
Meaning, basically accepting the very real possibility that things might not turn out okay. Philosophers have wrestled with this kind of paradox for centuries. You had Enlightenment thinkers like Kant who really believed our commitment to reason would inevitably lead us towards a better, more just world, a sort of rational optimism. But then you have someone like Kierkegaard who argued almost the opposite. He suggested that only by first embracing the profound depths of despair could one truly arrive at authentic, faithful hope.
So different paths to hope,
Really?
acknowledging the darkness in different ways.
Right. The powerful takeaway, perhaps, is that true hope often requires the courage to actually look despair in the eye, not just deny it or push it away. It might be in that very acknowledgement that a more resilient, kind of earned optimism can emerge.
That's a fascinating, almost counterintuitive idea, that embracing the possibility of despair could actually strengthen hope. But for someone grappling with real-world anxieties right now, isn't there a risk? A risk that thinking about despair too much could just drag them down further. How do you apply that insight without, succumbing to negativity?
That's an absolutely critical distinction. It's not about wallowing in despair, not at all. It's about acknowledging the reality of the challenges, but then figuring out how we actively cultivate hope amidst these large-scale stressors. So, practically, first, focus on your sphere of influence. When faced with these massive, overwhelming problems, identify what you can actually directly affect. Maybe it's local volunteering, adopting more eco-friendly habits in your own life, supporting mental health initiatives in your community. Small-scale impact fosters hope because you see tangible change, however minor.
Right, control what you can control.
Exactly. For example, if you're really worried about climate change, maybe forming or joining a local environmental club and experiencing those daily micro wins like reduced waste in your neighborhood, that can powerfully reaffirm that action is possible and that you're part of a solution, not just the problem. Second, really lean into collaborative hope. Hope doesn't thrive in isolation, especially when facing big issues. Seek out like-minded groups. Whether it's local co-ops, online support circles, whatever. Witnessing others' small achievements, working together, it fosters a sense of shared progress, like that community repair cafe example. Neighbors fixing things together, building community, and reducing waste.
So it's about connection and collective action, not just trying to shoulder it all individually. That makes a lot of sense, especially with global problems.
It really does. Third, implement practical self-care routines. This is crucial. People consumed by dire news can easily get trapped in doom scrolling, right? So consciously incorporate things like mindful breaks during the day, maybe daily reflection on small positives, or even short digital fasts, just stepping away from the newsfeed to preserve your mental energy for hopeful actions. Maybe after reading stressful reports, you could consciously shift gears. Journal about local reforestation successes you read about elsewhere, for instance. Actively seek out the positive, too.
Protect your headspace.
Absolutely. Fourth, try to reframe global challenges as collective growth. Adopt what you might call a challenge perspective. See these large-scale problems not solely as doomsday triggers, but also as potential catalysts for human collaboration, for innovation, perhaps even for moral evolution. This helps maintain hope by reframing crises as calls to unity and creative thinking, rather than just insurmountable obstacles. It's about seeing the potential for growth even in the midst of crisis.
Shifting the narrative from threat to challenge.
Precisely. And beyond these bigger strategies, integrating hope into everyday life also involves those simpler things we touched on. Asking yourself each morning, okay, what's one positive thing I can do or look forward to today? Creating those if-then backup plans for flexibility, posting physical reminders of your goals, engaging with hopeful social circles. And finally, never underestimate the value of professional support. Things like hope therapy can be incredibly valuable. It's a holistic approach, helping identify negative thought patterns, develop coping skills, build support systems, set realistic goals, all contributing to a stronger sense of hope.
Lots of tools in the toolbox then.
Definitely. Looking at the bigger picture, hope really isn't just some passive wish, is it? It's an active stance. It combines that willpower and way power to navigate pretty much any challenge, from the deeply personal setbacks to those overwhelming global uncertainties.
Right. And it's clearly not about denying reality or pretending things aren't hard. It's about consciously choosing to infuse hope into the hopelessness. Taking that next small step, like the right climber did. Or maybe simply affirming all is well internally, even when externally it really doesn't seem to be. It's a dynamic process, sounds like. It requires consistent effort, ongoing practice. But the rewards, that profound sense of mental strength, real resilience, they seem absolutely worth it. So just to recap the main points for everyone listening, we learned that hope is really defined by having clear goals, thinking about multiple pathways to reach them, and crucially, believing in our own capacity to act, that willpower plus way power idea.
And that we can actively cultivate hope by reframing negative situations, celebrating those small victories along the way, and consciously surrounding ourselves with positive influences and adopting hopeful daily practices.
And those inspirational stories from famous figures to everyday people, they really show hope in action, even in the direst circumstances, reminding us that mental health challenges and major adversity are surmountable.
Yeah, and amidst those big global challenges, the key seems to be focusing on your sphere of influence, engaging in collaborative efforts, prioritizing self-care, and maybe even acknowledging that embracing the possibility of despair can, paradoxically, strengthen our capacity for genuine, earned hope.
Right. Ultimately, hope is a learnable skill. It's a powerful ingredient for mental strength and true, lasting resilience. So now, maybe one last thought for you, our listener, to ponder. Can you identify just one small, actionable step you could take today, even if it feels tiny, insignificant maybe? One step that aligns with a hopeful pathway forward for you. Maybe acknowledge that taking that very step, however small, is actually an act of courage against despair. We really hope this deep dive leaves you with a renewed sense of possibility and maybe some practical tools you can use to navigate your own challenges. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep building your own resilience.